Okay. Thank you. Sorry.
Not a problem. Just let me get rid of this.
Yeah.
Okay, are we good to go? Okay, so 21 years ago on the 30th of June, I was a single parent with two young girls running a natural health centre. I knew nothing about the law, the justice system. I had no reason to. I was all herbs and healing and Zen and, absolutely no interest in it whatsoever. I did have a belief, and that was that the Scottish justice system was the best in the world. Better even than the English system, because we had our own system. We had Scots law. So different must have meant better. I had no information to base that on. That was just my belief. And then on the 30th, the night of the 30th, at 25 to midnight, going into the 1st of July, a 14-year-old girl, Jodie Jones, was found murdered behind the local high school, behind a wall behind the local high school. And this murder was horrific. This child her throat had been cut between 12 and 20 times. Her body had been mutilated. Her arms were tied behind her back with her own trousers. She'd been beaten. She'd been strangled. It was horrific. And this is just an area of little villages. So you can imagine the shock. It was horrendous. And from the 1st of July, the very next day, the newspapers were reporting that her body had been found by her 14-year-old boyfriend, Luke Mitchell. And by the 4th of July, just 4 days later, the clear implication that he was the killer. Now, to understand the finding aspect of this, Luke had received a message from Jodie's mum because Jodie hadn't returned home at her curfew time. And Luke had said he would come out and go up the route that Jodie would have taken. And if he didn't find her, he would go to her mum's house. He's halfway there and he meets three members of Jodie's family, Jodie's 17-year-old sister, the sister's 19-year-old boyfriend, and the 67-year-old granny, who had come from the other end, so a different village, and they're coming towards each other. The Gran suggested a double check, and Luke had his dog with him, who was training to be a tracker dog. Passed this V-break in the wall, and the dog suddenly jumped up on the wall, scrabbling at the wall, air sniffing, which Luke recognised as an alert. So he doubled back to this V-break, went over, saw what he saw and called out, "I think there's something here," in total shock. The sister's boyfriend then went over, and the Gran insisted in being helped over to see what was there. Now, the Gran actually touched the body. And this is where this case just departs from everything I would have expected. The police arrive and they take Luke straight to the police station, strip him, put him in a paper suit. They know his mum's on the way, but they strip him and put him in a paper suit. They've got instructions for him to be medically examined, photographed, samples taken from him. And meanwhile, the other three members of the search party are left in the school car park with other members of Jodie's family who've arrived. The police don't take their statements, they don't take their clothes, they don't take their phones, nothing. They don't know until 5 o'clock in the morning that two of them were over the wall. No idea. So we have this combination of this instant look to the police station and then the media starting to report in a tone that left no doubt that the boyfriend did it and it was just a matter of collecting the evidence to prove it. And that worried me at the time because the local hysteria was, as you can imagine, all these little villages, everybody's, oh my God, how could this happen? And everybody's looking at this 14-year-old boyfriend. So the first thing in this brilliant legal system in Scotland that I thought we had, the first thing that I learned is we have a thing here called, or we had a thing here called, a Section 14 interview. I'd never heard of it. And what that means is the police can take any suspect, anybody actually, lock them in a room for 6 hours and interrogate them with no access to legal advice or assistance. And this is what they did to Luke just after he turned 15. They take him into this room. There's 3 officers. So the one in, one out, you know, good cop, bad cop. This whole thing's going on for 6 hours. The appeal court judges would later say the behaviour of those officers was outrageous and to be deplored. But it was legal. That was legal in Scotland. So they held it. First of all, they arrested him they didn't arrest him. They took him in for questioning on the 4th of July, so 4 days after the murder. This was all over the newspapers, photographed. The media were camped outside his house. And then for the next 19 months, he was in the papers daily. Before trial, before everything, he was in the papers daily. And then came my next shock in the Scottish legal system. We had a thing called the 110-day rule. And that meant once a person was arrested, they had to be taken to trial within 110 days or let go and never charged again. But Luke was a child, he was a minor. So they left his arrest until April 2004, when he was 15 years and 9 months old. The 110-day period from then to when it ran out, Luke would turn 16 during that period, which meant he could be tried as an adult. So straight off the bat, the Section 14s have now been outlawed. 2011, they were outlawed. Too late for Luke, but they're not allowed to do them anymore because we don't have peace in Scotland. We don't have the protections of peace in Scotland. So 9.5 months after, no, 19 months after Jodie's murder, with us in the papers and in the media all day, every day, apart from ridiculously, after they arrested Luke, the newspaper started saying a 15-year-old youth who cannot be named for legal reasons because he'd been arrested. And then when he turned 16, a few weeks later, they started naming him again. So already we have all this prejudice in the local area against this kid. And then we get to trial. And it became apparent they had no evidence. This was a circumstantial case, purely circumstantial case. No forensic evidence, no physical evidence linking Luke to the scene, to the murder, or the murder to him. Nothing. They took his house apart 3 times. You know, there was no evidence whatsoever. So they built this circumstantial case, linking together all these little bits of nothing of substance to build this narrative to turn him into a devil worshipping, demonic young man who was mad on drugs and all of this sort of thing. And it worked. It worked because in January 2005, Luke Mitchell was found guilty. Now, I should have said, sorry, when I said there was no evidence, physical evidence linking Luke to the scene or vice versa, there was DNA from other males. One of those males was Jodie's sister's boyfriend. His DNA on Jodie's t-shirt. And the police dealt with that in the way I'm sure every one of you would expect. They went to Jodie's sister's boyfriend and gave him an innocent explanation for the DNA, for his DNA being on the t-shirt Jodie was wearing. They said, Jodie must have borrowed her sister's t-shirt without her sister knowing about it. And his DNA got transferred onto the t-shirt in a wash. And that's how it was on the t-shirt. There's a slight difficulty there, aside from the scientific nonsense. Jodie and her sister didn't live in the same house. Jodie lived with her mum and her sister lived with her gran. But this was the explanation that the police gave to the sister's boyfriend to explain away his DNA being at the scene. There was a condom found about 20 yards from Jodie's body, filled with what the police themselves called, or the police scientists called, fresh semen. Now that was found in the early hours of the morning. They didn't trace the person who left the condom there until 3 years later. Even though they were in his house the day after the murder, they didn't realise this was the guy whose condom was found at the scene. When they finally traced him, his explanation for the condom being there was, forgive me if anybody's a bit sensitive, he'd gone down behind this wall. It's a woodland strip. He'd gone down behind this wall to masturbate because he had no privacy at home. And the police said, okay, thanks for that, bye. So now we have another male's DNA very close to the murder scene. We would later find out, and I'm going to come to that, there's other male DNA that is unidentified to this day. And none of it's Luke Mitchell's. Luke's still in prison, by the way. So they got their conviction, and then Luke was sentenced. Now remember, he's 16 years old. He was sentenced without limit of time. So for the rest of his life. Minimum punishment part of 20 years, which is up on the 14th of April this year. And he's maintained his innocence throughout. So he won't be getting parole on the 14th of April this year. Not a chance, because he will not admit guilt for something he didn't do. And in order to meet parole board conditions, you need to show that you've reduced your risk of offending. Well, how do you reduce a risk of something you've never done in the first place? So that was my baptism of fire into this work. I wasn't an alternative therapist for much longer after that, I think about 3 years, and then this work completely consumed me. In 2008, we got Luke's appeal. That was my first shock, actually. Steve asked earlier, what drove me? I thought this would be, after Luke was convicted, I thought this would be over in a year. And that huge mistake, they'll take it to appeal. You know, the appeal will realise that it was terrible, and they'll send him home and go look for the real person. Yeah, still here, nearly 21 years later. That didn't happen. So we got to the appeal. It's 2008, so it took 3 years to get to appeal after he was convicted, and 5 years after the murder. And there were a number of grounds for appeal that you know made a lot of sense. One of them was this Section 14 interview and the absolute bullying, the goading of this child with no legal advice or representation. And as I said earlier, the appeal judges said it was outrageous and to be deplored. And the officers did not get the hoped for confession that had driven that behaviour. And then they decided that no miscarriage of justice had taken place because this 15-year-old kid, not only did he not confess, but he, and this is in the judge's words, gave as good as he got. 3 experienced detectives interrogating a 15-year-old child, and the appeal court judges decided no harm done because the boy didn't confess and he gave as good as he got. You can see now how my belief that the Scottish justice system was so fantastic was collapsing into ruins by this stage. After the appeal, I managed to get access to the case papers. Now that's really unusual in Scotland because case papers actually belong to the lawyers here and not the convicted person. There are very strict rules on who they can share that information with. And, you know, for example, if they share with forensic scientists, that's as far as it goes. We're not allowed to put it out in the public domain, all that sort of thing. But I did get access to the papers. And that is where any faith I'd had in the system evaporated. In there, we found information that had never made it to trial. Now, my belief had always been juries get to hear all of the evidence. I think that's everybody's belief. But when we saw what was in the files and realised what had not been before the jury, so the stuff about the forensics, none of that was before the jury. But one of the most shocking things for me was the search trio, the family members of the search party for the first month explained in all their statements that the dog reacted at the wall, scrambled at the wall, air sniffing, and that's why Luke went back and went over the V-brake in the wall. By the time they got to trial, all three had changed their stories. All three said on the stand, either they didn't remember the dog reacting or the dog didn't react, that Luke just went straight to the V and climbed over, and that allowed the prosecution to say he must have known where the body was. Now, those early statements from the search party saying it was the dog did, the sister's boyfriend describes the dog. He said it was a big dog, it was an Alsatian. When it was standing up against the wall, its head was higher than the V. And by the time it came to trial, he remembers nothing about the dog. Well, it was a pretty detailed statement at the time, but by the time they get to trial, all three are saying, nah, he just went straight there, and he was unemotional, and all of those statements were in the case papers when I finally got to see them. So that then led me to that thing where you go, well, hang on, if the jury didn't hear this and the jury didn't see that and all of that, what else might there be out there that we don't know about? And that's when I started to hear that there were other people who tried to give statements to the police, and the police wouldn't take their statements. And these people had some really interesting information. Several parents, now remember, a lot of the witnesses in this case were just kids. Luke and Jodie were only 14, so that it's their friends group that the police are coming down on. And a lot of the parents later came to me and said they were basically telling us, if your kid is seen to be supporting this little, do you know what people are going to say and what people are going to do? So they were leaning on these kids to get them to say particular things. We know now that several of them have had serious mental health issues as a result of the bullying back then. And the things they felt compelled to say, knowing they were not strictly true. So that infuriated me. That's putting it mildly. Once I'd seen the case papers and I'd seen what had been done and I'd seen how much manipulation there had been, I was furious. It's like, no, you don't do that on my behalf, in my name. That's not what this is about. By then, obviously, I'd met Luke's mum. She'd put a note through the door of my workplace asking if I could help. I'd met Luke by then, and I was now in the teeth of this thing. I was gonna get to the truth. I was gonna find the answers. 21 years later, still no answers. So we put together an application for the Scottish Criminal Cases Review Commission, because after you've been at the Court of Appeal, your next step is the Commission. And the Commission is supposed to look at cases to see if a miscarriage of justice may have happened. So we took this whole case to them. We pointed out that there were other suspects. So that there's two youths on a moped at the V-brake in the wall at the exact claimed time of the murder, which was 5:15. And they don't come forward, in spite of police calls for them to come forward, because they know they were there. They don't come forward until 5 days later. And it turns out that one of them is Jodie's cousin. And he says in his statements later, he didn't come forward because his gran told him not to. Well, that's Jodie's gran. Why would Jodie's gran tell them not to come forward when they were at the V-brake at exactly the claimed time of the murder? And by the time they got to trial, they too could remember nothing. They couldn't remember where they were. They couldn't remember what they were doing while their bike's propped there at the V-brake without them. Couldn't remember anything. So, you know, we're turning up. We've got the man with the condom. We've got these two youths at the V-brake. And something else that had come up was a stocky man had been seen walking behind Jodie that evening before she disappeared, before she vanished. A stocky man had been seen walking behind her, but to our knowledge, he had never been identified. So we put this application into the commission, and it took them nearly 4 years to do the review and to come back with their report. Now, just let me have a look. They came back with his rights were breached. Obviously, he was questioned without access to legal advice and assistance. He was a child. Several of his rights were breached. They also came back and said that evidence had been withheld from the defence that we didn't know about. We knew nothing about that. And then the shocker, Stocky Man had actually been identified back then at the time. Something else that had not been released to the defence. And Stocky Man was identified by a witness as Jodie's brother, who's an interesting character in this, in terms of his medical background, can I say, his mental health issues. He was known to have violent psychotic outbursts. He was on the highest dose of antipsychotic medication at the time. His episodes had been increasing since the January in 2003, never looked at, never considered a potential suspect. But his alibi that night was his mum, who said he hadn't left the house. And this witness sees him, or sees who she believes is him, fitting this description of Stocky Man. So the commission came back with all of this. His rights were breached, the evidence was held, the Stocky Man had been identified. They come back with all of this, and they conclude that there's no miscarriage of justice. And it took me a while. This was 2014 by now, and it took me a while to realise how they did that. So when the case was brought as a purely circumstantial case, they take, he was into Marilyn Manson, and Marilyn Manson was into the Black Dahlia murders, so that must have influenced him. So we tie these two together. And he smoked cannabis, so there's another thing. And he was a devil worshipper, and there's another. And they're linking all these things together to make him look like the devil incarnate. When it comes to the commission, you would expect they would do the same thing. They would say, right, his rights were breached here, linked to these rights were also breached, linked to the failure to disclose evidence. No, the commission do it exactly the opposite way. His rights were breached, but that in itself does not constitute a miscarriage of justice. Gone. This information was not released to the defence, but that in its own right does not constitute a miscarriage of justice. Gone. And they do them each individual one and say, well, in its own right, it's not a miscarriage of justice. They don't tie them together to bring the weight of all of them together to say, hang on, if you look at all of this, clearly something has gone wrong. They don't do that. They can do it to create a case, but not to undo a case. So that was us, 2014. What now? Where do we go next? We were out of time for an appeal to the Court of Human Rights, because we had to exhaust all domestic remedies at the time, and the clock was ticking. And then the ruling that changed the Section 14 interviews was 2011. So then that opened a door where we could have gone to the Supreme Court and said, Luke was one of the people that was affected by the Section 14 thing that's been outlawed now. We need an appeal. And again, the Scottish judges said they would allow appeals for cases that were still active when that ruling was made, the 2011 ruling was made. Luke still had one outstanding appeal for sentence. Everything else was finished. All we had, the appeal had been heard, and we were waiting for the decision from the court on the appeal against sentence. So this was a race against time. We had to get to the Supreme Court before the Scottish judges ruled on the sentence hearing. Guess who won? Yep, the Scottish judges. They decided after months, they decided the sentencing hearing within a matter of days of us getting before we got our application into the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court then said, this case has no active proceedings. We can't hear an appeal on the basis of the Section 14 interview. So that one was gone. So when we got to 2014 and the Supreme Court was gone and the European Court was gone and the Commission was gone, where do you go then? What do you do? Especially for somebody like me who was learning as I was going along. This wasn't something I knew how to do or where to go with it. So in 2018, I was turning 56 that year. And my dad died suddenly when he was 56. And it kind of occurred to me, I thought, if I go his route, I'm the only person with this amount of knowledge about the case. Mayhaps I should write it down so that if anything happens to me, it's there for somebody else to take over. And everything, when I say everything I knew, and I need to be quite clear about this, there are things I could not put in the book because I have the case files. So I'm bound by the same rules as the solicitors. There's stuff I can't share. There are ways around some of it. So for example, I can give excerpts from statements, but I can't put the full statement in the public domain. So over time, if you put out enough excerpts from something, the full thing will eventually be out there. But I'm not saying I did that. I'm saying that's a possibility. So 2018, I published Innocence Betrayed, which was pretty much everything I knew up to that point that I'd uncovered about the case. And what I was trying to do was say, here is the story you were told, and here's everything that never made it into the public domain that changes the story. It turns it on its head completely. And the following year, a guy called James English, who has a big YouTube platform, asked if I would go on and do an interview about the case. And that just exploded it. For 16 years by then, I'd been banging on doors going, somebody please listen, anybody listen. Nobody was listening. And then James English did the interview and it exploded. 325,000 views it's had. He then interviewed Luke's mum. He then oh yeah, I forgot to say, Luke and his mum both did polygraphs in 2012. Both passed independently of each other. But they can't be used either. So James English did the interviews with myself, with Luke's mum, and with the guy who did the polygraphs, a guy called Terry Mullins. And then in 2021, Channel 5 put out a 2-part documentary called Murder in a Small Town. And they brought in 2 ex-detectives to look at the case as they would have investigated it had they been the officers in charge of the case. And these guys were horrified at how this case had been dealt with, at how so much had been missed, ignored, hidden in this what they saw as tunnel visioned pursuit of Luke Mitchell to the exclusion of everybody else and everything else. They were horrified. They went back and looked at the scene and you know, that documentary went out at the end of February 2021. And after, by then, 17 years of nobody listening, thousands and thousands and thousands of people were now listening and very, very, very angry in Scotland. Very angry that they had been misled. that they'd been led to believe that what they were being told was the truth, was the whole story, was everything there was to know about the case. And in actual fact, none of it was true. It was a narrative laid over piles and piles of facts that had never come into the public domain. So that then led to what is now a 3-year-old campaign. We've done protests. That's what I was going to say. Sorry, I almost forgot about this. Directly after, the year after the documentary, we're doing protests, we're writing to MPs, we're trying to push this case forward. And then we discover, just when you think things cannot possibly get any worse, Police Scotland had started destroying the remaining evidence, knowing we were going for another application to the Commission. So we dived in and got the lawyers to write to them, and they stopped it immediately. And here comes another thing about the Scottish justice system. In 2013, we amalgamated all our police forces into one. There's only one police force for the whole of Scotland now. So there's no oversight. Who investigates individual forces if you've only got one force? Nobody. The top of our legal system, the highest authority in our legal system, is the Lord Advocate. And she sits at the top of the Crown Office Procurator Fiscal Service, who are the people that decide whether cases are to go to trial and whether there's enough evidence and yada yada. So when we discovered this evidence destruction, we're then told that the Crown, I'll use the acronym COPFIS, Crown Office Procurator Fiscal Service, COPFIS. COPFIS and the police had got their heads together and decided that now was the time to get rid of this evidence 4 years before they should have done, knowing we're going to go back to the Commission. So we got it all stopped. And then it came to, fortunately, there were samples, forensic samples left. Out of 3,000 odd productions, there were about 300 samples left, forensic samples. We want those samples. We want them tested, because half of them have never been tested. We didn't even know they were there. So then we go to Police Scotland and we say, we want samples, thank you very much. And they go, well, COPFIS have said, we can't just give them to you. We need to restrict them to this and these circumstances and these labs. And we went to the forensic scientists and they went, no, that's not how it works. 6 months ago, we found out that COPFIS did not instruct the police to restrict them. COPFIS tell us they said nothing of the sort. But just to tie the last of any faith anybody might have had in Scottish justice into a neat little bow, the Lord Advocate is a lady called Dorothy Bean. And we had a petition that reached 25,000 signatures. And we took it to the Parliament, the Scottish Parliament, addressed to the First Minister and the Lord Advocate, 2 people in the Scottish Parliament. The Lord Advocate in Scotland is the highest authority in the justice system, but she's also a government minister. No conflict of interest there, is there? Not at all. Well, if you think that's not a conflict of interest, Dorothy Bain, the Lord Advocate, is married to the man who prosecuted Luke. Married to Alan Turnbull, the man who prosecuted Luke. She dismissed our petition out of hand, wouldn't even look at it. She has said there will be no independent review of the case whatsoever because the police did a sterling job and there's nothing to see here. And she's the highest authority in Scotland. Where do you go when the highest legal authority says, nope, no review, nothing? So we went back to the supporters and we said, okay, they said 25,000 signatures isn't enough. We now have over 30,000 signatures. We also have a new First Minister. And I imagine very soon we're going to have a new Lord Advocate, given the way things are going politically in Scotland. That is where we are, up to date. We do have the petition, if anybody would like to see, and all we're asking is that the case be reviewed. We're not asking people to take a side and decide whether they think Luke's innocent or guilty. From what I've told you today, do you think the case needs looking at? Does it need a review? And that's all we're asking for. Please, a bit like they did with Hillsborough, give this stuff to an independent panel. But our Scottish MPs and our supporters have written to just about every MP in Scotland, and they all come back and say to us, oh, we can't talk about individual cases, we can't intervene in individual cases. And at the beginning of this year, it might be the end of last year, a new Scottish MP stands up in the Scottish Parliament, and what does he do? He talks about an individual case that he believes is a miscarriage of justice in detail, but it's not this case. So, that's the story of the last 21 years as concisely as I can put it together for you. More than happy to take any questions that anybody's got. There may be some things that for legal reasons I can't answer, but I'll tell you if that's the case.
I got to say, and for obviously we don't know each other well, Sandra, I'm speechless. It sort of almost demeans what I was trying to achieve as a police officer, and I've written down. We will take questions, and I'm glad we got quite a bit of time here. PACE, the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, came in 1984, and that was to safeguard prisoners at a police station's right. It was well overdue. This is a clear, in England, it's an abusive process as well, in that he was arrested and the process happened when he was 16. That's an abusive process. The disclosure, we would be required to disclose, and if you don't, the case would have been slung out. In an English court, the result of this, by any view, the Crown, the Procurator Fiscal, the Supreme Court, it would have been slung out as unsafe and unsatisfactory. I've got to say, my blood is boiling, and I can see that with everyone else. And my immediate reaction is to, and I've got friends of mine in Parliament, in the Lords actually, some good friends, is to go and start a bit of civil disobedience. So an ex-DCI gets nicked, and that would sort of, but that's extreme. And this is not about me. This is about the sterling work, and I'm sure that I am speechless. And I think what I'd like, guys, is this. There's a lot of questions to ask Sandra. So if I can ask you to unmute one at a time. I know this is difficult, just on your screens, and put questions to Sandra one at a time. And I'm going to ask Kerry Yates, because she's fielded loads. So Kerry, if you want to unmute and then ask and put any questions you would like to Sandra.
Firstly, Sandra, hi, I'm Kerry, and
Hi.
I just want to give you a big, huge hug. And I'm sure everybody here will give you a virtual round of applause for sticking with it for the 21 years. Go on now, everyone.
Thank you.
And I think you have gained a lot of supporters here, and we will be behind you, Luke. And I think that is absolutely God's honest truth. We will be behind you, because it looks like you could do with a drink as well. And
Thank you.
and also, yeah, and I think we could all do with a drink after what you just told us. And hopefully, Steve, after this, any sort of like links that we've missed, can you email us over the links to the petition and stuff so we can kick ass in Scotland? So we
The
can
link tree that
yes.
the groups, the two main groups have put together a link tree, and in there are links to absolutely everything: the petition, the documentary, all of the YouTube stuff. That there's loads in there. So the link tree is probably the easiest one, so that you can access as much as possible. So we can get that to you.
Yeah, and also, does Scotland have an sort of like an appropriate adult scheme? It's
Good
sort of
point.
like because Luke obviously was 15, and he was. This is me learning because I do miscarriage of justice work as well, and obviously I've got autistic children, so obviously they would have an appropriate adult in that situation. They haven't never been. But has Scotland's got an appropriate adult system in Scotland?
We
Firstly,
do.
mm-hmm.
In the section 14 interview, there was supposedly an appropriate adult there with Luke, and in the 6 hours he opened his mouth once to confirm his name.
So basically, he was useful, and this is me being kind, and I'm trying not to swear. He was useless as a chocolate teapot, yeah?
Yep, absolutely.
Yes, and it sounds like to me, Police Scotland did a thing called the read technique on Luke.
Yes.
Because that's made famous with the Brendan Dassey situation in America. So basically, whatever you need, you've got me on your side because my husband's half Scottish. My husband's half Scottish. I've got relatives in Edinburgh. So if you need someone, I can, go stay there and we'll go from there. So
we have a protest on the 14th of April outside the High Court in Edinburgh for anybody who happens to be here, because that's the 20-year anniversary of the day they took Luke away and he never went home again. So the 14th of April this year, 20 years. So we have a big protest planned outside the High Court in Edinburgh.
Right. So I'm gonna unmute myself now so other people can talk and say well done for what you've done so far and big hugs.
Thanks, Kerry. Thank you.
Yeah, tremendous. So, Paula Schofield, have you any questions of Sandra?
Thank you, Steve. Hi, Sandra.
Hiya.
Yes, I have hundreds of questions. I've been sitting screaming at my laptop and then suddenly realized a few minutes ago that you could see me. Apologies if you see me swearing at you. Yeah, God, I have so many questions. I was thinking the same as Kerry, like, why did he not have an adult present with him at the time? That seems outrageous. And, from what you were saying, it terrifies me for my kids because as a family, we're pagan. My kids and my husband are all into Iron Maiden and that kind of music. And then obviously I'm into all the crime stuff. So, if they're going to tie my kids into anything, they've got it all here. I'm raising serial killers by the sounds of things.
Yeah, they portrayed Luke as a goth while showing pictures of him in the media where he clearly was not a goth.
No, and I can't understand why they were allowed to name him. They've ruined this kid's life and his family's life before they had anything substantial, which they still don't have.
Yeah.
But I suppose my two questions would be, first of all, do you have a mass social media campaign that we can all share out even further? And then my other question was, why were the family not questioned regarding why they were being so quiet about things? It almost seems like their silence to me screams guilt, that one of them did it and the rest of them no. And it's like, well, she's dead, so we can't change that. We'll protect everybody else. Was that ever investigated? And if it was, what happened? And if not, why not?
I tend to try not to go down the what did the family know route, simply because I don't want to point the finger at somebody else without evidence the way it was pointed at Luke. We know now that the police that left the family's house, they went to take the missing person details that night, and they left Jodie's mum's house that night under the impression that Luke was coming up on his bike, that Jodie had left with Luke at tea time from her own home that night, and that Luke was the only one out searching. None of those three things are true. And we can't get to the bottom of how those very, very first police officers came to believe that within 10 minutes of arriving at Jodie's mum's house to get the missing person details and the call coming in to say that the body had been found.
Yeah.
I don't
Even
know.
circumstantial, it doesn't make sense.
No, we know Jodie's mum admitted that she told the police he was coming on his bike, but she meant to say he was coming with his dog. We know that. But the other two, the bit about Jodie leaving with her boyfriend from her own home at tea time and Luke being the only one out searching, don't know where that came from. But you can see why the police were suspicious from the off. Mm-hmm. Why would a kid bombing up a track on a push bike in the dark suddenly stop and climb over a wall?
Yeah, because
if that had been the case. Yeah. But that wasn't the case. So Jodie's family do not excuse me, do not speak to the media. You don't comment on what we're doing. Again? Sorry, what was that?
I don't know what's happened there. What Paula, are you? Can we move on?
Yes, go ahead. Yeah. Thank you.
The next question is from my friend Jeanette. She wants me to put this question to you. Mm-hmm. Is Amir Anwar has ever been approached to help? And that's AAMER. I think I know who this is actually.
Yeah.
Has he ever been approached to help? If anyone is up for a real fight, it's him.
Yes, we have actually. We approached Amir about 10 years ago, but at the time he had another very large case, and he couldn't take on another huge case like that at the time. We did approach him recently, and there's a legal difficulty with him being able to take on the case at the minute.
Okay, guys, sorry, I need to marshal this. Can I just ask you all to mute at the moment, please?
I don't know if you can help.
Thanks very much. What I would like to do now is I would like to bring in, I've noticed that we've got Action for Justice that's come on. Is there anything that you want to ask or support with Sandra?
I don't think I can use this.
There's some technical difficulties, I think.
Okay, yeah, that's all right. So, I'll tell you what I'm going to do, guys. I mean, the good thing is that we have recorded this, so everyone can get a copy of this, and there's a lot of links. And also, what I am going to do, I'm going to send the chat box as well to everyone, because there's some extremely good links. So, any other questions for Sandra?
Yeah, I've put a text on the chat. If you could have a look at that text, and I sent you an email today.
Thank you. And what's your name, sir?
I've sent you on this chat. It's S.W. blah 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 outlook.com.
Right. And what would you like to ask Sandra?
It's an observation. Sandra, I've spoke to you for a while now, but I've stayed in the background, obviously. You've got 100% support from everyone in Scotland, and we're all behind you. The dreadful thing for me as a parent is to watch a 14-year-old boy standing behind his cell door, innocent. That boy is 34 or 5 now. Yeah. We can't have that. it's heartbreaking. I'll leave it at that. But yeah, I'm on Twitter. And I'd just like to say, keep going, because it's well worth it. It could have happened to anyone.
Yeah, I think.
Thank you.
Can I just emphasise that point? I think that is a really prophetic and good point. Bearing in mind what Sandra has told us, this could have happened to any one of us.
Yeah.
And that, you know, and it's just dawned on me with that. Guys, any other questions? We're doing well here, and thank you very much for your forbearance. Anyone else want to ask any? Well, we could be here all night. Next question, please.
Yeah, I'd just like to put an observation from the underground community, all the people that are served in jail, all the community who dive about smoking reefers here and there. Everyone knows what the situation is, and we believe now that 40 caravans were destroyed, and now it turns out we all know the people who organised the destruction and firebombing 40 caravans knew Luke Mitchell was innocent. We are dealing with really sad, deep people, and I'll leave it there. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Next question, please. Sarah McCarthy, can you go for it, please?
Hiya, Sandra. Can I just echo everybody else's comments? Just wow, absolutely shocking. I can't actually believe something like this could happen. And I've got sort of two questions, both of which are along the same line, which is there nowhere else you can go? I just can't believe that in this day and age there isn't somewhere else, some independent body where you can say this is not acceptable. You know, what is going on? You know, is there no recourse to the British Parliament or I don't know, the EU Court of Human Rights or anybody? And then the second part of my question was then, have you made any strides in trying to make the police any more, I don't know what the word would be, but you know, any more independent? So, you know, is there any steps toward getting some kind of independent body and some kind of independent oversight? Because from what you said, it just sounds absolutely corrupt beyond measure.
Yeah. In answer to your first question, can we go to the British Parliament? It's a political thing. So Scottish justice is devolved. And there's that sense of, I don't wish to offend anybody. I'm not a Scottish nationalist, but we're separate. We've got our own justice system. It would almost be like having to go back and say, yeah, we've got our own justice system and we don't know how to make it work. So there's that real reluctance to go to. We could still go to the British Parliament and the British Justice Ministers, because this is done in the name of the Crown. So we could do it, but
it just seems so horrible for the poor lad. You know what I mean?
Yeah. We've come this far without upsetting. Well, no, I was going to say without upsetting too many people. That's not true. We've upset a lot of people. But if we then start saying to the Scottish people, right, guys, your justice system's rubbish. We're going to have to go back to what they say is the English Parliament. We're not going to be the most popular people.
No, I was thinking EU, but we've bloody left that and all, haven't we? So we're stuck.
Well, we haven't left the convention. We've left the economic union, but we are still part of the Convention of Human Rights.
Could you not appeal against human rights?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Could you not appeal on the grounds of human rights? You know, an incorrect.
We were out of time to do it for the original trial.
That one,
but
right.
We're now. I'm trying to keep our powder a little bit dry here, but we're now looking at another route that may allow us to make a second approach. Okay. So we've got some legal experts looking at that at the minute. It's one of these, we might be able to just tweak the argument enough to get it through, but time will tell. And it's all time. Everything's so slow.
Great stuff. Sarah, thanks very much for those excellent questions. And here is one that's come back from one of our number here, and it's probably one of the best questions. What is in place in the Scottish system of justice to stop this happening again?
Nothing.
Ah,
Sorry. See, I have to smile, because if I don't, I would either scream or I would cry.
Yeah,
So I've just got to smile. Nothing. There is nothing to stop it happening again, with the exception of the change from the Section 14 interviews no longer being legal. Everything else, in fact, in some ways it's worse, because at least we didn't have a single police force back then.
Yeah.
So no, there's nothing to stop it happening again.
Okay. All right. What now? A big question here. What is it that we can do as a group? There is 50, 60 of us, but we're a group of 3,000 people. Sorry, that's my retriever barking. Stop it. What is it that we can do to help you?
I would say that the top three things, and I know there's a couple of our team on here, guys, if you're still here, if I miss anything, remind me. Sign our petition, please.
Okay.
That's a big deal. Sign our petition. There are two main groups. So there's Jodie Jones and Luke Mitchell who got justice, and there's We Stand Together with Luke Mitchell, both groups. If you find those groups on Facebook, I think they're on Twitter as well, and sign up for them. If you can share those, there's loads and loads of information, and we have big discussions about what next and what the developments are and all that sort of thing. So if you can do that. The one other thing that we're looking at is, now we can't come to the British Parliament just yet, because a lot of people would take that really badly. But we can invite people from all over the UK to write to our First Minister and our Justice Secretary, expressing their concerns about this case. Now, undoubtedly, they will get the same response as we did, and that is we can't talk about individual cases. But if they become aware that they're being watched from outside Scotland, and that is becoming apparent now, we have people from Australia, New Zealand, the United States, Spain, Portugal. So the more they become aware that they're under the spotlight from more than just us, from outside Scotland, hopefully that they'll start to think, oh, we're not coming out of this looking too great here. So those are the three sort of main things. And obviously I'll provide contact details for the people involved. Guys, Nicola, is there anything I've missed? Sarah's signed the petition. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, that's good. That's really, really cool. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I've got to say that I'm personally still speechless, bearing in mind that the rank that I was at, I've investigated lots of these. This would have been slung out the English courts, as you well know, Sandra, well before now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure of two things. Is first of all that the links that you've sent, the petition is sent off. Next month in England, in Chiswick, I'm helping a TV channel, a well-known one, launch a crime program, and they're looking for stuff to kick off. Now, I've done some work with Channel 5 before, but guess what's going to be at the top of my agenda? I've got to say, from a police officer and as a psychologist, I'm speechless, to be honest. What I'd like to do, and I'm sure that we have this expression, you speak for yourself, but I'm sure that everyone that's been on this evening has been touched, upset, has a glimmer of hope, but most importantly, thanks for all you've done for what was a child, and you use those words expressively, to now a guy in his 30s, and at that point, at his age, I was a detective inspector, and he's lost that part of his formative life. So we do support you morally in that. I really just hope that you can go to another area. I would never advocate civil disobedience, but I'm coming close to it.
Yeah, just what you said there about Luke's age. He has now spent more time in prison than he spent on the outside. He was 15 when he was incarcerated, and he spent 20 years in prison.
Yeah.
So he's been 5 years longer in prison.
Yeah.
Than he was out among us as a child. As a child, he never made it to adulthood.
Yeah, yeah. Couple of other things before we finish. Your book, what is it called, and how can we access it?
It's called Innocence Betrayed. So ENTS, not innocence. Innocence, yeah. Two of them, betrayed. It is available on Amazon, but every time it looks like getting popular, they hike the price to something ridiculous. I do have author copies that I'm happy to send out to individuals. If you just, the email address is innocence.betrayed@gmail.com. And if you email me there, we can either do PayPal or bank transfer, and I can send the books directly to you. But from those books, from the direct sales books, I give a donation from every sale to the Fighting Fund, because we are going to have to pay for testing the samples. We have to pay for the protests and all the setting up of them and everything. You know, this work is not cheap. So I give a donation from every sale that's from me. I can't do it from Amazon because they take too much for themselves.
Go ahead. It's a nipple.
Is it? I can't believe it. That fucking Louis was just still in.
Action for Justice. We can hear you.
Right.
Sorry about
that. Okay, good. Guys, listen, there was a lot of stuff that I wanted to talk about, things in the future, but actually that's paled into insignificance. So what I will do is to send you that stuff, because this evening has been about what is clearly, from any quarter, a clear, certainly from my quarter as an ex DCI, a miscarriage of justice, where, and you know, as Sandra has rightly and fairly said, it's not just about Luke, it's about the victim's family, and do we want a system of justice, dare I say, anywhere in the British Isles like this? And the answer is no, we don't. So Sandra, in conclusion, thank you so much for what you've done, giving up your time, not only for this evening, but the years and years that you've been fighting for this justice. And our hope is at some stage this case gets the justice it deserves.
Thank you. Okay,
thank you so much, and I know that everyone will applaud what you've done this evening, and I will make sure that everyone on this Facebook group is aware of the links, so to help you in a small way to continue your fight.
Thank you, and thanks to everybody who's come on tonight and listened to this story, because the more people that learn about it, the more the truth's out there. And I do believe, okay, it's taken a bit longer than maybe I thought at the beginning, but the truth will prevail. It has to.
Yeah.
That's my belief.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, that's brilliant. Thanks once again, Sandra. So from Dr. Sandra Lean, and for Forensic, Criminal Facebook group, thank you very much, and I wish you all a good evening. Thank you very much. Good night.
Good night.